Good evening. Welcome to the Independent City Council study session, September 13th, 2021. I have a couple presentations this evening. Mr. City Manager.
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. Does it matter with you which item we start with, or just start from the top? Is that okay? All right. I am having a hard time getting my agenda pulled up.
Be the
Municipal services.
municipal services
Okay.
payment.
Then with that, I'll ask our Municipal Services Director, Lisa Phelps, to begin coming forward. Of course, we're fortunate to have our half-cent voter-approved sales tax. Since Lisa's team has taken over that operation, there's been a number of changes and innovations, and we wanted to share one of those with you tonight that we think will help maximize our resources when it comes to street maintenance and our annual street overlay program.
All right, well, with that introduction, good evening, and he pretty much summed it up, so I'll save you some time. I'll go quickly. Basically, like Zach said, I'm sure you guys have fielded a lot of phone calls about the condition of our roadways. I know we have. So in considering the phone calls and the complaints that come in, and in looking at the pavement condition index that is being updated this year, but is 6 years old now, just looking at the ratings of our streets overall, we obviously need to do something different than we've done in the past. So basically, just wanted to go over a few things just so we're all on the same page about where we're going moving forward. So not to bore you with definitions and details, but when I say pavement management, basically that's just the planning of pavement maintenance and restorative treatments, which would be your mill and overlay that we've typically done in the past, in order to maximize the value and life of our roadways. So again, historically, mill and fill or overlay is the thing that we've used, but there are other more cost-effective maintenance approaches out there that we've been exploring. So basically the concept that we're looking at and employing at this point is looking at the difference between maintenance and restoration. So we've historically done just restoration. We wait until our streets, again, boring you with details, but get to a PCI, a pavement condition index rating of 40 or below, and then we say, oh, it's time to overlay that street. So it's already degraded past a point that's a good user experience to drive down it, and it's obvious to all that it's in need of repair. However, if we would employ some sealing technologies up front, we'd never really get to that point, or we could stave it off for a much longer period of time. So basically, as a preface, there is no real one-size-fits-all approach to this. I was recently at the National Public Works Expo, and I spent most of my time in classes talking about pavement maintenance, because again, this is, like Zach said, we took this over a year ago, and this is still relatively new to me. But every entity represented at the expo uses multiple treatments for the road systems. None of them were just using overlay alone like we do. So last year, we did some crack filling. So you can see in just these pictures alone, this is kind of proof of protection that these seals offer. So the picture on the left is a road that was crack filled. That's actually our demise. And you can see that this was just actually taken this last week. So there's no further degradation where the crack was filled. The picture on the right, however, is actually Jackson Drive. And you can see that seam has blown out in the center and now would be eligible for a pothole repair, not even a crack fill at this point. So just one freeze-thaw cycle of winter did that to that seam that last year wasn't even really eligible to be filled compared to the picture there on the left. So just again, the smallest, most basic sealing technology shows that there is a proof of that working. So there are several pavement management approaches. You have your maintenance and your restoration. So maintenance would be our emergency pothole repairs that we try and respond to within 24 hours of being called in. And then the preventative, which is what we're moving into. And that actually will bring to you, should be the second meeting in October that will bring forward a contract for approval to award for seals. And then there are the restoration techniques that are corrective, which is what overlay is, or reconstructive, when there's a complete street failure. So this year we had one on Deborah that required full depth repair of the entire segment of roadway. So again, the concept of this is just to keep from getting there. So this new approach basically uses data to determine the best method of treatment rather than just defaulting to the one we've always used. It extends the life cycle of the roadway, it reduces the frequency of expensive restoration treatments, and it enhances the road quality surface to the greatest extent possible. So this allows us to touch more lane miles in town than overlay alone. Our typical historic practice significantly limits the number of roadways which receive rehabilitation because it is a little cost prohibitive compared to the seals. So this new approach, some of the methods, things that go into it would be performing visual inspection surveys, evaluating the pavement condition index, which again, it will be updated this fiscal year, and using that to identify the most appropriate pavement management option. So the options that we're looking at would be mill and overlay, which again, overlay is not going away, it can't. We have enough streets in town that are past the point of doing any other treatment, we have to continue overlaying. However, we are looking at a cape seal, which would be for a PCI rating between 40 and 50, and a scrub seal, which would be for a PCI rating between 50 and 60, which would be considered roughly fair condition. The other treatments that are out there are things we hope to look at 3 to 5 years down the road. We're just not there yet. We need to bring our condition up overall as a whole before we get to those. So, I say PCI a lot. This is a breakdown of the quality of our roads in town. So, the ones that would be eligible for overlay would be the blue, that are below a 40 PCI rating. And anything above an 80 right now wouldn't be targeted, just so, again, we're not messing with the roads that are still in good condition, because we have enough that are not, that we need to address those first. So what we're really trying to target with this program would be the roughly 55% of roadways that are in that fair but declining condition there in the yellow and the red. So again, scrub seal, cape seal, and mill and fill. Using this approach provides the highest ROI. So spending $1 in maintenance, and you can see this chart probably illustrates it best, but if we spend $1 on preservation and maintenance activities when it's still in good to fair condition, we save ourselves $6 to $10 down the road in having to do full reconstruction. So basically the concept in its simplest form is use seals to keep that pavement maintenance condition as high as possible for the longest period of time so we don't get to a point where we're doing full road reconstruction. And then also when we talk about ROI and touching more streets per year, I think this probably sums it up. I'm a visual person, so this helps, but if we use this blended approach, we'll get to touch about 130 miles at a minimum, lane miles of roads this year, whereas you see if we do overlay alone, we would only get to 50. So that's a huge improvement in quality of our roadways for our residents, and again, still uses overlay, but then those seals allow us to just get out there and improve the road surface of considerably more lane miles than any other option alone, or than overlay alone. And then there at the bottom, that 11 years versus 25 years, that is how long roughly it would take if we do this blended approach. We can touch, by calculation, we touch every road surface in 11 years and improve it using some form of these seals. If we do overlay alone, the calculations come out that it would take us 25 years to touch every road surface in town. And just for historical reference, in the last 10 years of overlay, we've hit 62% of the streets in town. And while that is more than half in 10 years, it's definitely not all of the streets in 11 years. And I will let you know, just fewer dollars are available for overlay than were in the past. We have debt service in the street sales tax now that we didn't in the beginning. So less money, less dollars are just available to go to just overlay. So again, historical numbers will show that we were doing more than we could do now at today's prices with the dollars available. So just in summary, again, this new approach gives us the opportunity to address more of the issues in a much quicker time frame than it does versus overlay alone. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions or comments from council? I have a couple things
Sure.
that I've complained about for quite a while on these roads, and that's AT&T, Spire, whatever. Tearing up these roads, I mean, they're in terrible condition, and I think a lot of it is the compaction, and I've noticed that, and I know we don't have a lot of people laying around to do this, but sure would be nice, I think, if we had an inspector out there to make sure these roads are being compacted properly. You know, it seems like after a couple of years after they dig them up, then we've got this ditch everywhere. And the ones that are doing it here lately, I'm really concerned about their quality of work. It's pretty bouncy through there for a new road. And, you know, we spend a lot of tax money here in this city for these roads, and it's, I just don't know what's going on out there, but they're definitely deteriorating. On that crackling thing too, where that center thing, I brought this up about a year ago too, where back in the day, and I think technology has changed and everything, but back in the day when I was a kid, there was a guy that walked along there with a torch and heat that cold surface up so the hot surface, they bond together. And we see this all over the city, and that's part of the process. I thought that was, you know, doing that on these seams, but like I said, technology's changed. The only other thing I had also is a lot of this caused because our ingredients, like the actual asphalt, is a percentage of so much. Are we too below, you know, at a minimum, or what
So
are we doing
we
on
did
that?
change the requirement, which is one of the reasons our cost has actually gone up some for cost per lane mile has gone up over time, but we did change from requiring a type 3 to a type 5 asphalt, so we would get a longer duration from that pavement and a longer life cycle. So that's a recent change just in the last couple years. And as far as in-house, staffing in the streets division has decreased greatly over time. I'm told, again, many years ago that we were like the second biggest construction company in the state even. There were so many people in public works streets. A lot of that equipment and the people, obviously, with funding has decreased over time. We are staffing back up to have a dedicated paving crew. Again, we got our paver delivered. And also about the right-of-way issues, we're trying to staff those positions as well. We did actually interviews today for construction inspectors and looking to hire those positions back to full staff. And then we've also started meeting with specifically AT&T and Spire's people ahead of time before they come in and start doing work, and just try and lay out the expectations ahead of time. And then we're also going to try and modify our ordinance for requirements to tighten those up a little as to what they can and can't do for restoration.
Well, thank you, appreciate it.
No problem. Anything else?
That brings us to our next presentation. IPL rate comparison study.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem and members of the council. I know a longstanding question among the council and members of our community is how our electric utility rates compare to some of our peers around the area, particularly those municipally owned electric utilities. So based on those inquiries and direction we've received from the council, staff has completed that analysis, both in terms of the benchmarking, but some of the causation of what we're seeing behind that as well. So tonight, our Director of Power and Light, Jim Nail, is here to share the results of that with you. Before Jim starts, I will mention for your and the public's benefit that this was shared with the Public Utility Advisory Board at one of their recent meetings as well.
Evening, Mayor Pro Tem, Council. As the City Manager mentioned, we've had numerous questions from the Council and the Public Utility Advisory Board about our rates. Why are they where they are? How do we compare? In the almost year and 9 months since I was dragged out of my secure little NERC position, I've had that question several times, and always the part of the question was, well, why is there a difference between Independence and Columbia? Why is there a difference between Independence and Springfield? And just looking at the raw data from EIA doesn't tell you that story. So I reached out to MPUA and got a list of engineering firms that had done this type of study for their member companies in the past. And Finley Engineering came in and did this study for us. And this report, as City Manager mentioned, has been presented to the PUAB last month. First of all, I think it's important to note the purpose of the study. This was not a rate analysis to dig into IPL rates and look at the different factors. Really, the purpose was to look at us across a region and see what the differences were between those utilities that drives those rate differences. So this is a rate comparison study, not a individual rate study. They took a look at the utilities within a 200-mile radius and then ranked them based on revenue, and any utility that was over $100 million in revenue, they included into this study. They also threw in some of the larger commercial companies, Evergy, Ameren, or Union in the east side, Liberty, which used to be Liberty, which is part of Algonquin, down in the south part of the state, to look and see how some of those averages compared. They did both a weighted and an unweighted analysis, and we'll get more into that here in a little bit. And they compiled the data using financial statements that were public by these utilities, as well as combining that with EIA data as well. So first of all, understanding energy pricing. Energy pricing, generally stated in cents per kilowatt hour, that energy has to be available 24/7, 365 days a year. So if you have whatever your electric usage is, and no matter whether it's higher in the summer or higher at noon or higher at midnight, that delivery has to be available 24/7. And so that's what we would call as part of some of our fixed costs, maintaining the infrastructure, maintaining the system, having the personnel on hand so that they can maintain that service. Some customers obviously use a lot more than others, and that usage affects how your rate structure comes out. As they noted here, the cost of building, maintaining infrastructure, providing that electricity to all customers, large and small, you recover that as using a portion of your rate, and then your sales generate the rest of that. For many, many years, the electric utility industry has strictly used a cents per kilowatt. Usage was king, and that's how they recovered their rates. Just about every other utility that exists, gas, water, sewer, cable, telephone, just about everybody has gone away from that usage rate and implemented a customer charge and then a usage charge on top of that. That's so that they can make sure that they recover some of those fixed costs that are part of that total. So that understanding how the customer sales mix affects that. As he said, no matter how large or small, that customer mix is what helps determine what your rates can be. In general, you're divided up into three classes: residential, commercial, and industrial. And just to give you some numbers, residential customers typically consume between 800 and 1,000 kilowatt hours per month. Commercial customers, generally 5,400 to almost 12,000 kilowatt hours a month. Industrial class customers, anywhere from 40,000 kilowatt hours to over 3 million kilowatt hours a month on that bill. The reason that makes a difference, whether you have a connection to your house, a connection to your business, or a connection to a plant, that 100 so feet of line, the transformer at the pole, the box at your house, the connection drop, it doesn't care. It doesn't care how much electricity you're using. You still have that same connection that IPL folks have to go and take care of. If a tree falls down and knocks the line down, it doesn't care whether that line is serving a residence or a big plant. the cost to send a crew out to repair that line is the same thing. So obviously, if you have someone using a lot of electricity, that helps to cover those costs, helps you to spread those costs out more. What we found with, when they did this analysis, City of McPherson has the lowest rates of any utility studied in this mix. Their rates were down to 6 cents a kilowatt hour. However, 80% of their revenue comes from industrial accounts. A handful of industrial accounts generate 80% of their load. Residential is only 9%. Now compare that to independents. 53% residential, using the smallest amount of electricity, 41% commercial, and 6% industrial. Our rate, combining 19 and 20, came out to 12 cents per kilowatt hour. That's an all-in cost. The difference is Independence has the lowest average usage per customer. We have the lowest average bill per customer, but we have higher rates in order to recover that revenue. So the next thing that Finley did was they took a look at, what if they leveled the playing field? How would that look? Well, first of all, for us to match the other companies, we would have to see, in order to bring our costs down to about 10 cents a kilowatt hour, which is the average in this study, we would need to have approximately 33,000 new residential accounts, or 4,000 new business accounts, or 27 industrial accounts, or some blend in between there. If you took the other companies and changed them to our mix of residential, commercial, and industrial, that average of 10 cents a kilowatt hour would jump up to about 15. McPherson, which enjoys that nice 6 cent per kilowatt hour rate, if they had to deal with 53% residential customers, to capture the same amount of revenue, they would have to raise their rates to over 30 cents a kilowatt hour. So the impact just on customer blend is tremendous. Now, their final analysis, they said Independence has a relatively high electric rate for customers. However, that's only part of the picture. We have the unique challenge that almost no other utility in this region faces. We are not a regional industrial hub. Nearly all of our customers are residential, very little industrial customer base. And he says their final statement there, IPL's rates are as low as they can be without putting significant financial stress on the utility and the city. Now, that's not to say that there aren't things we can do. Obviously, we can look at improving efficiencies. We look all the time, take a look at our staffing mix, and anytime there's a vacancy, we look very seriously at whether or not we need to fill or can fill that position, both on the union and on the salary and the hourly side. But the large driver that affects our rates, the thing that Finley pointed out the strongest, is that without a way to bring in more commercial and industrial accounts, there's limited impact that we can have on the overall rate structure. The report has many, many more charts and graphs where they actually do a page for each of the individual utilities, and you can see a lot of these graphs and charts for those numbers. McPherson was picked out simply because it's the most drastic difference, but it illustrates the point of it, just what a large impact that industrial and commercial component has. So subject to your questions, that's the presentation.
Is there any questions or comments from the council? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Hang on there, Jim.
I felt like Clarence Thomas and just let everybody go last. So really what we're talking about is economic development for the city if we're going to have any chance to lower the cost and lower that or have a better blend. So that's really the focus where we need to be on bringing in that heavy industrial base.
True. And the illustration I used with the PUAB, I said, many of us have shopped at Costco and Sam's Club. Why can you get better prices there? Because you're buying a whole lot more with one trip, than people that go to the convenience store. The prices at Quick Trip are necessarily higher because people are buying less per customer, whereas Costco, Sam's Club, that volume makes a difference. So if we can bring in businesses, industrial, commercial, that will generate that volume, that will help take the pressure off of rates.
So this has been just a conversation that we've had for 30-plus years of how do we increase that industrial-based, commercial-based, high-usage companies to come in here to do that. So this is bigger than what the city council can offer. I mean, we're a part of this whole cog in the bigger part of the wheel. So we really need to work with our Economic Development Council folks. We need to have a stronger tie with them. They're in the midst of a transition and reforming and relooking at what that group is going to look like. And I believe Steve Mayer, the president of the EDC, has been reaching out, has been trying to reach out to all the different council members to talk about some of the different changes there, because what we've been doing obviously isn't working. So if we're going to move forward in the future, then we need to work as a council and being very communicative with the EDC and work in conjunction with them to bring in, to start to be competitive, bringing in these large industrial users, which kind of goes into this, Jim and Mr. City Manager. We have the greenfield out there, which resides in Councilman Steinmeier's district and part in Councilman Stewart's district. But that greenfield development is only going to be there if there's going to be strong capital outlay for having those utilities hookups. I mean, we can have a Fairfax or something drop in over here now and want to come to the city and say, hey, we'd like to have this built out. Can we do this footprint? But there's no hookup. There's no substation. There's not the infrastructure there. So how do we look to find, let's frame the question, how do we look to have that type of incentive to build that capital outlay, put that capital outlay? Because we're looking at millions of dollars to do that.
Well, I can't speak for water and sewer, but I know within our service policies, we do have provisions in there to work with a company that's coming in to look at, what is going to be the impact, what do they need to provide the service that they're going to consume, and we do have incentives in there to help partner with them to make that infrastructure development.
Is there areas to where we can be proactive with building infrastructure there? I'm thinking of a substation, lack of a better capital outlay, to put one to where we believe where this would be the best fit, so there's not that 18-month, 2-year delay or however long of trying to build that utility infrastructure.
That's something we could look at. It's certainly harder to justify a maybe than it is
For sure.
a demand, especially if you're looking at an area where the current infrastructure meets the demand, but we're trying to project ahead. That's a tough one, but we can certainly look at those things.
It is. It's having that crystal ball to be able to look at and working with our other investment partners so we can have a clearer crystal ball, if you will, to get there, because that's so important. And I rushed from another meeting, so I didn't bring the examiner with me, but if we looked at the days gone by over the weekend, this is virtually the same discussion that they were having in 1971, 72 of where we're going to put industrial and commercial stuff. So this conversation's been going on about as long as I've been alive. So we just have got to work to get this. If we're going to take it to the next level with that mix of customer service or customer base, we've got to get working in that strategically. So with that, I would thank you, and I would suggest that our my colleagues up here work with the EDC as they begin to reach out to start doing things differently.
Certainly.
Okay, thank you, Jim. That will bring us to staff reports.
Yes,
Review
sir.
of the proposed American Recovery Plan amendment.
Yes, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem and members of the council, staff was asked to bring this item forward for your consideration this evening. At your place setting tonight is a copy of the modified spending plan proposal. I know since last Monday night I've had an opportunity to speak with most of you and review this in a little bit more detail, so I do not have a robust presentation prepared on this evening. If there are any specific questions, we would be happy to answer that. Otherwise, as the conversations with you have suggested, we will place this back on the agenda next Monday night for your consideration.
Very good. Is there any comments, questions?
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem,
Go ahead.
just a comment. So yeah, obviously, we were given this modified spending plan last week, and it failed. The reason for my no vote was I just didn't agree with, particularly one thing that was in here. So if it had nothing to do with not supporting the police, even though I was accused of that last week, and which is kind of insane in my opinion, because I am a police officer, so how could I not support the police? So if it's going to go back on next week, then I would prefer that we vote on it individually. You know, this is something that, like the federal government does, they just take this huge bill and they throw everything in there, and then they try to solicit votes out of it. I think every one of these items that are modified next week need to be voted on individually so that we can have the chance to debate it and, you know, give the positive and negatives, and that's the way I'd prefer it done. Thank you.
Anyone else? Go ahead.
Mr. City Manager, is that a possibility that we can do that?
I'm looking at the city clerk and her desire to read all of those, but if that's the will of the council, we'd be happy to add it that way. The other option that the council would have is if you wanted to amend that in any way to strike an item or to reallocate or reappropriate. If the direction we're getting tonight is to add it as, you know, whatever, 10 or 15 different items, we can do that as well too.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem,
Yes, go ahead.
I would say that we already have a mechanism in place of modifications, and that we should just stay true to that modification. If any council member in this plan who has a desire to pull out for separate consideration, they may do so, and they can proceed as such.
Okay, Mr. City Manager, have anything else this evening?
I have nothing else, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem.
Meeting adjourned.